Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to their DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the Music Supplement Group Spellcasting Concerts, designed by Jason Bowers for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Star, Leverly, Thomas, Ian, Captain Mike, Jeremy, Adam, Leroy, and Goblin Works. Gold patrons: RPG, Paper Crimes, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos, Did, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead as a Lounge, Sam Ross, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy 619, Skillian, Nick, Farty, McButterpants, Blood Angel, Veronis, The Fireworks Factory, and Baboon. Thank you all very much for your support. Now, I'm sure I've mentioned this in previous reviews, but I'm not super keen on how the Bard is implemented in 5th edition. I want it to be something more musically unique rather than just basically an arcane spellcaster who can dole out bardic inspiration dice. Some of the subclasses are pretty fun, but I just, even compared to older editions of D&D, which I don't have a whole lot of experience with, but you know, playing things like Neverwinter Nights with 3rd edition and playing games with that use 2nd edition, like at least they had ongoing like bardic songs that you could activate that had, you know, buffs or debuffs or various, you know, basically acted like spells, but they lasted for a while and they felt like you were actually, you know, singing songs and using magical music. And I wish we had that in 5th edition. So what this does, this supplement, which is over 30 pages, provides rules for spellcasting as a group, which is not technically just for bards, but definitely favors people that have performance, that they're proficient in performance. It also provides different songs, so that instead of just having it be one effect, there's over 20 different concert songs that you can choose from, although I guess you're supposed to be learning these songs too as kind of like part of the loot that you find. And the 3rd chapter is for DMs because it provides musical monsters that the players can actually stumble upon. So this entire system isn't just designed for player characters. If DMs want to have a bunch of minions, or maybe an evil bard, or just whatever, you know, creature or enemy that you want that just has minions that can sing songs or some kind of effect, maybe it's kind of a creepy, you know, chorus of undead or something, and they can produce those same kind of song effects with the same exact rules. It just provides a lot of different musical monster choices. So from that standpoint, it's a pretty comprehensive supplement, and the rules are very, very simple. Basically, you have to know the song, which again are provided in chapter 2, but we'll go over chapter 1 for now. And you have to have a minimum number of performers, which the song dictates all those rules, the DC and everything. Basically, you make, as an action, a performance check, charisma performance. You can also make an arcana check, but you can only use half your proficiency bonus. It's kind of like a backup, like, well, okay, in case you really don't have performance, then you can use arcana because it's still kind of, you know, music and magic in this case are adjacent to each other, but it favors performance-based characters. Not necessarily just bards, but let's face it, performance for most people, I'd be curious to say if your characters ever cared about performance when you weren't a bard, because if you do, that's great. I think that's awesome if you include the fact that your character just likes music in general, but considering there's an entire class built around music, most of the time you're probably going to have bards who are interested in performance. But you make this check, and then it has to have a certain number of people, again, tied to the spell, usually it's between 2 and 3, who make a similar successful performance check or arcana, and then the effects go off. And the duration, the range, all that information is down to the actual spell, or the actual concert spell that you're performing. So in this case, concert is really just 2 or more people singing a song, which isn't necessarily what we think of as a full concert. And in fact, I think the entire title of this supplement is kind of a misnomer, because it's not just rules for group spellcasting. It really is providing this new expansion system for bards. Again, assuming bards are the ones using performance a lot, and being able to cast all these new spells, of which, as I mentioned, they've provided over 20 of them, and they're all very hilariously punny, which I appreciate. A lot of, you know, pop culture references that even if you don't know music very well, you can probably recognize like half the song titles, and then it kind of draws from their effects from there. Once you complete the song, everybody's done their action and completed their performance check, the song goes off, and then you just have to maintain concentration using the same concentration rules for spellcasting, which is anytime you are hit and you take damage, you have to make a con saving throw with the DC equal to 10 or half the damage taken. The exact same rules as if you were concentrating on a spell, which means if you want to cast one of these music spells, you can't also be concentrating on another spell. So it kind of makes it tricky for spellcasters to be involved. But like I said, you don't need the whole party. You only need between 2 and 3 people to actually get this effect off. And technically NPCs could do it too. There's nothing stopping. In fact, it even mentions in one of the notes here about chiming in that you could even have an enemy character chime in to the and maybe get the buff or whatever effects themselves. You could surprise it, and the bandit happens to be really into music and recognize that song, which is kind of a funny aside. And that's basically the whole rules. The other half of the rules are contained in the individual spell effects themselves. So it's a huge thumbs up because it's very easy to understand. It's intuitive. It doesn't make it overly complicated. It uses the concentration rules that are already built into the player's handbook and just says instead of using any kind of a spell slot system, you can just have to make this check, but it requires at minimum 2 people, and I think about half the spells were 2 and half were 3. So it requires, action economy wise, it's pretty big for the players to do, even though they're not spending spell slots. And you have people that maybe not are magically gifted at all able to have these spells on, but the benefits are pretty good because they last anywhere from a minute to an hour, I believe, depending on the song. And then as long as you maintain concentration, as long as you have those minimum people maintaining concentration, you can even have multiple people chime in if you want like a buffer. It even mentions the fact that if the song requires 2 people and a third chimes in with their action to keep the song going, which is called keeping the rhythm, and one of them were to be, lose concentration or become incapacitated or something, the song is still ongoing as long as you've got like the 2 people, if that's the minimum. So all of that makes sense. It's all pretty easy to understand. And I think it's a big thumbs up for these rules. And these rules are only 1/3 of this supplement. The second of thirds, the chapter 2, is all of these songs, which are the concert spells that you can use. Now you have to, I believe, acquire them. I think they're called librettos, a written representative arcane musical performance with specific directions. So basically some kind of a use it as a lute, basically. It's just like, it's a spell scroll that you find, but you can like learn how to cast the concert spell. So it's kind of up to the DM to be able to give these to the players. But providing a lot of cool abilities. None of them feel particularly game-breaking, but they run the gamut from tier 1 all the way up to tier 3. Now, you might be looking at this going, 13th level, what the fuck? But the designer decides to, instead of using the very confusing system that D&D uses in terms of its spell schools, how like, when you're 3rd level, that opens up, 2nd level spells, and when you're 5th level, you can cast 3rd level spells. Like, that whole thing is just, it makes sense if you're a D&D player, but for everybody else, if newcomers are just like, wait, what? Why is the spell levels different from my character level? Well, that's just because it's been that way for a while, which doesn't necessarily mean it's good. In this case, the level literally translates to the level of the players. So to cast Bat Moon Rising, all the performers have to be 13th level or higher. So it's just a minimum of the level. So that's pretty just easy to understand. But all of these things have the number of performers, which is how many have to complete that check in, while the other person has successfully completed theirs. The range, the components, which usually include some kind of instrument. Some of them have a monetary cost, but most of them are just kind of flavor text in terms of make sure you've got like one of these instruments on you. The duration, and then the performance DC that everybody has to make in order to successfully complete the song. And I believe you have to fail it. If you fail 3 times over the course of trying to use the song, it's a flop. All performers suffer 10 plus the spell's level in psychic damage, and you must succeed on a charisma save or gain 1 level of exhaustion. So there is kind of a penalty there, but it requires quite a number of failures. So I guess that's just to stop people from just brute forcing their way through trying to get these effects. But I like these songs at all, and they're all very, very fun. I'm particularly fond of "O Come All Ye Fae Thrall," which summons a fairy dragon, which everybody can actually control on their turn, and it uses the same rule as like Conjure Elemental, I believe, where if you lose concentration, the creature doesn't go away. Instead, you just lose control of it, which is always a fun aside for DMs to go after. There's Singing in the Rain, which creates an illusory cheering crowd, which grants advantage to spell attack rolls. Stairway to Elysium grants temporary hit points, resistance to necrotic damage, and advantage on death saving throws. And then you've got Great Walls of Fire, which, you guessed it, summons a wall of fire. And they're not all just combat abilities, too. We've got, let's see, What Does the Rock Say? Which animates the ground to where you can like talk to it and ask it questions, similarly to how like Speak with Plants and Beasts work. Riders on the Brainstorm grants telepathy between performers, although I don't know how useful it is to get telepathy if you're having to sing a song during the telepathy, because usually telepathy is useful for like sneaking and scouting situations. And Humanoid Fly spell, FLY, gives performers a 60-foot flying speed. So just a whole lot of cool options. I mentioned there's over 20 of these throughout all different kinds of levels. And this is exactly what I wish bards could just do out of the gate. I wish they had some ability of just bards to be able to cast these kind of spells. I mean, this is really still a good system. And this technically doesn't have anything to do with bards. You just have to be, I believe, proficient in performance or arcana, and then being performance allows you to roll that check a little bit easier, whereas arcana only use half proficiency. But it's not just bards only. Technically, you know, anybody who just wants to be able to sing these songs can absolutely do it. But gosh, I wish, I mean, this is a good enough system to where I wish that bards as a baseline feature could just sing songs and have those kind of AoE effects with all different kinds of abilities, whether they're, you know, damage related or stealth related or, you know, social encounter related or something that they get like as they level up. That would be the kind of bard that I want to see in like the next edition of D&D instead of just a spellcaster who's got bardic inspiration. Chapter 3, meanwhile, is completely different in that it offers new stat blocks, mostly variants of creatures that exist in the monster manual that are proficient in performance, with the idea that they can cast these spells. And the advice here that's given by the designer is, you know, make sure they appear in large enough numbers, because once too many of them fail, because once they start getting hit, they have to start making con saves if they're not dying already to maintain concentration. So if you only put, you know, 3 or 4 of them, it's pretty easy to break that up in the first round. Whereas if you put a dozen of them and they're all singing this song that's doing some kind of terrible effect to you, then you need to start breaking that up and really start fighting them. And it even mentions, you know, you could use like minion rules, which I believe are from 4th edition, where you only put like a creature with like 1 hit point. So they're just all pure, you know, glass cannon and designed to just motivate the players to be able to cleave through them, and you can use larger numbers that way. That's something that is advised to use here, so that you can use large numbers of enemies and be able to use those group spellcasting traits. Which, by the way, there's an interesting trivia point that the designer makes here, where only 1 monster from the monster manual is proficient in performance. Only 1. I'm curious if you know what that is just by guessing. I don't think I would have. Obviously, you can pause the video and probably like zoom in and maybe try to read what it is. I'm not going to tell you because I think it's a really interesting trivia question, but there's only, according to the designer here, and in the baseline monster manual, 5th edition, only 1 monster. Some monsters may have musical-based attacks, but literally proficient in the performance skill. There's only 1 monster. So what it does here, because you need to make a performance check in order to actually cast these spells, these new monsters all have performance as a proficient skill that they have. And they're usually tuned a little bit weaker than their normal compatriots because they're designed to appear in multiple groups, because this isn't just 1 monster that can do this. Again, this is 2 to 3 minimum. And because you want to actually have this song, you know, in theory last at least 2 or 3 rounds, you would need probably, you know, 2 to 3 times as many of those creatures to be able to use them. So we've got the Fairy Dragon Warbler, the Fiddler Imp, Goblin Jester, Big Brass Golem, Kuatoa Chanter, a Resonance Mephit. You know, all of these are variants of existing creatures that just gain the ability to cast these concert spells. And they all have that built into their stat block, where they can only cast certain spells, and they're usually pretty appropriate to what kind of creature you're facing. I do love that the Pulsing Slime has the Haul Me Maybe song, which can increase your mass and make you heavier to where you automatically deal force damage anytime you are grappling or on top of somebody. So all these slimes together, just thump, 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 you know, you can just picture them like just vibrating with the beat or something. Rizulka, which I can't believe is not in the monster manual already, the classic kind of undead has been drowned. Maybe it's from the Tomb of Beasts I'm thinking of. They had like a bunch of these kind of where it's undead ladies basically that seduce you into death. Has Bat Moon Rising and Dead Hands Party. It's a lot of undead, dark themed spells. It all makes sense and appropriate for their stat block. So that's a really cool addition. And it's neat that it's not just for players. The fact that DMs can take all of these rules and systems and then add that to the enemies. And that would be a good way of actually introducing that system to the players, I think, too. You could have, you stumble upon a bunch of goblins and there's a bunch of goblin jesters around and they're singing, whatever kind of song and creating that effect. And then when the players actually defeat them, maybe they find that libretto as a loot pile and that allows them to then, or some kind of magic item or something that has that information. And that allows the players to then be able to use that effect if enough of them want to do that. And because the duration is usually longer than, it's not in rounds. I believe it's usually, hour or minute. If you were smart, you could actually use your action right before combat. It's kind of hard to usually tell on that. It kind of depends on the DM and the situation. But you could technically start the song, before and then maintain it. You wouldn't be able to stealth because you're singing. But you could start that song up and then enter the fight already having, not have to use that action to sing the song and just have to maintain the concentration, which is pretty cool. Unless you're a party full of barbarians or something, then it's probably not going to work because you can't rage and sing at the same time, which is always a bummer. The one caveat I have here is that the actual production value, the look of this product isn't great. It's not terrible, but there's just not a whole lot of artwork. You can see here in all of Chapter 2, there's not a single piece of art. And what art is there is mostly just stock DM's Guild resource art. In fact, I've seen this freaking singing human in a lot. If I had a dime every time I saw this poor dude, I would have many dimes. I like the little music note thing at the top here. By the way, if you want a good example of a product that uses also a music-themed product, which is the Bard College of Percussion, which I reviewed last year, was one of my top 10 favorite products I reviewed in 2020. Did an awesome job of including a shit ton of really cool artwork of music sheets and instruments and just different paraphernalia and accessories to do with music specifically. You don't have to just look at D&D stuff, especially if you've got a theme of music that you can enhance using just pictures of music and art of music and instruments and music sheets and all these different things. Would have really gone a long way to enhancing this product. I think the actual content is really it's well written and all that. I just would have liked to see a little better effort put into the art side and the production side of this supplement. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for group spellcasting concerts. Pros is pretty much my pros are all three chapters. So pros, chapter 1 is that the concert casting is easy to understand. It works well. I don't have any problem with the balance issue or anything. It works. You don't have to use a spell slot, but it takes multiple people. It does technically take their action economy, although I mentioned before you could start it earlier, and then you have to maintain concentration to gain that effect. I think all that works very well, and there's prerequisites in the fact that you have to learn these spells, so it's ultimately up to the DM, and they still have all the range limitations and level limitations and all that. Second pro, there's over 20 punny concert songs with fun effects. That's a huge amount. It gives a large variety throughout multiple tiers and levels. Combat related, non-combat related, just everything in between, and it's a really good mix of songs, and I really appreciate all the fun titles. And pro, chapter 3, over a dozen musical monsters for DMs to employ concert magic. That's a really cool addition that we didn't need to make this a good product. You could have just included the group spellcasting rules, included how players use them, and then include the actual spells and slapped it on and called that a winning product, and I would probably agree with that. But the fact that we also get all the DM tools to have minions that can use these group spellcasting rules and spells is really cool. And then my only con, as I mentioned at the end of the review, is it's just not a whole lot of artwork, and what is there is just kind of standard stock art, so it's just not an exciting product to look at. Final verdict: with simple rules, fun songs, and new musically gifted monsters, Group Spellcasting Concerts is a wonderful expansion for DMs, bards, and other magical music lovers. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.